I thought on this lovely rainy day I would read you a story. It's called The Story Shawl. Once upon a time, when there were only a few people, and therefore every person was precious to those who knew them, your grandmother's 100 times back great-grandmother made a shawl. She spun it and wove it with wool from her own sheep, and she lovingly embroidered it with little pictures all over it, which reminded her of her relatives. A type of flower her mother liked, a black bull of the sort her grandfather raised, a trumpet like the one her brother blew in battle. Not just these pictures, but many, many more. When she handed this shawl down to her daughter, she explained the meaning of each picture. The shawl was passed on in this way for several generations of women, until one girl decided to add some new pictures about recent events. On and on the shawl went from mother to daughter. If a woman died before she got a chance to explain the meaning of the pictures, an aunt or a grandmother did her best. As the generations fanned out and the family grew into a tribe, cousins also wanted to remember the shawl, so someone made a song about it. Then a famine came, and because of the famine, a war. Everyone's life was in turmoil. A grandmother had the sense to pack the shawl away carefully, but in the chaos, no one knew where she put it. The tribe slowly grew and became part of a nation. Much later, the shawl was found. It was lovingly wrapped, but people had forgotten what it was, so it was put in a trunk. Still, a few families here and there had an old bedtime song about the story shawl. It began, "A flower, a bull, a trumpet, what was upon the shawl? Our doctor shall remember, their mothers and grannies all." Good, eh? A long time passed, and then finally a woman happened upon the trunk, and there was the shawl. When she unwrapped it, it was moth-eaten and faded and a bit smelly, so she put it on the back step for the cat to sleep on. One day, Grandma was visiting, and she went out back to sit on the step in the sun. She saw the old piece of needlework and began to really look at it. Wasn't that an old battle trumpet? And a black bull? She began to sing scraps of the bedtime song, and the trumpet and the bull. Over and over to herself, she remembered a few lines that seemed to fit with some of the other pictures she could still just make out. She folded the shawl up and took it around the village, much to the cat's dismay, showing it to the oldest women she knew. One said someone must have made it in her mother's time, perhaps for a child that liked the bedtime song. Others spread it out on their kitchen tables and wrinkled their brows and tried to reach back into their memories for something they couldn't quite touch. A noblewoman came to the house to buy some butter. She got sight of the shawl where the old women were looking it over. She said she thought it was ancient and very important. Granny handed it over in lieu of 5 years' rent. The noble lady took it back to her house, and she and her waiting women got to work, making an exact copy of it, well, as exact as they could. When they came to missing bits or pictures they couldn't make sense of, they just put in something that would look nice, enhance the overall piece. Then they put it in a glass case in the library. Once a year during the village festival, the local children were all paraded past it and told, "That's your heritage. Now get back to your sums and your Latin verbs and stop acting like peasants." When the noblewoman died and her grandchildren decided to downsize, The old shawl went out with the boxes of junk. The shawl in the glass case went to a museum where it began to generate a great deal of interest. Scholars had a field day, and it was in all the papers. Collectors searched high and low for the original, not realizing that it was in the possession of an illiterate rag and bone man who occasionally used it to clean his horse brasses. Young women began to bring their children to the museum to see the shawl. They would sing out in little snatches of the bedtime song. There's the bowl, there's the trumpet, and as they looked at the shawl, they seemed to remember more verses than they thought they knew. The children gazed not at the shawl, but up at their singing mothers with great, round, wondering eyes. Old women came, and they pressed their hands and their faces against the glass and wept. But no one could tell whether they were weeping for joy or for sadness, not even the old women themselves. Such was the power of the picture shawl. Some say the first shawl never actually existed, and that people just get hysterical about anything these days. Other people say it was witchcraft, and that somehow the old shawl was made new again. Some people have started a new custom of singing the bedtime song, all 14 verses, with their children as they dance around their midsummer fires. And on winter evenings, women in houses throughout the land can be seen embroidering shawls and humming while their men wash the supper dishes. So I wrote the Story Shawl in an attempt to illustrate how meaningful and essential cultural material can be if it's passed down in unexpected ways, and how even shreds of such material can be reactivated and take on a new life when they meet with folk memory. Like the pictures on the shawl in the story, myth can become powerful in new ways when it meets indigenous viewpoints or spiritual intention. So this story was from my book called Mythology, which has some poems and an essay in it as well, if you like that sort of thing. Thanks for listening.